NBC News correspondent Rahima Ellis, who is standing by on 84th and Park outside of St. Ignatius Loyola Roman Catholic Church. Rahima, good morning.
Good morning, Brian. As you mentioned, family and friends have arrived at the church. Many of them started arriving about 8:30 this morning. Already inside, as you told us, Senator Kennedy and his wife, along with Congressman Joe Kennedy and his mother, Ethel. Mayor Giuliani, Patrick Moynihan, Dara Hanno, the John Kennedy's girlfriend, Maria Shriver and her husband, Arnold Schwarzenegger, are also here. There are also just crowds of people who are pressed up against the police barricades that are lining the streets here between 83rd and 86th. And also I can look and see people just staring out of their windows. In many ways, I think some people think that Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis belonged to this city, in particular New York. She was a native New Yorker from Long Island, and she loved this city. It was here that she returned in 1964 after the assassination of her husband, President John F. Kennedy, and this is where she raised her children. And while we have talked so much about her being a private person, and indeed she intensely guarded her privacy, she also did many very public things for public causes. You know that she was interested in the arts. She also made it a point to protect historical architecture. One in particular that everybody knows about is Grand Central Terminal. And the fight that she waged, along with many other people, went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in 1978, a ruling was made that helped protect national landmarks in the cities and towns all across this country. So again, while she was very private, she also worked intensely on some public affairs.
Rahima, let me interrupt you for just a moment, because we're getting a picture from outside her apartment on Fifth Avenue, where for the first time this morning we are seeing the casket bearing the body of Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis. The casket will now make its way on over to St. Ignatius Loyola Roman Catholic Church, where the service is set to begin at 10 o'clock. Those of you who may just be joining us right now, I'm Bryant Gumbel, along with Katie Kirk. We're on to keep you apprised of the funeral arrangements for Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. Following the private funeral mass, which will be said at the church here in Manhattan over on 84th and Park, the body will be transported to Washington, where there'll be a burial service at Arlington National Cemetery, and Mrs. Onassis will be laid to rest beside the late John F. Kennedy, and there President Clinton will be making a few remarks.
Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, of course, Bryant, died on Thursday night around 10:15 in her home. She had asked to be returned to her apartment on the Upper East Side. There we see her daughter, Caroline, and son, John, Jr.
And the gentleman who was off to their left, if we can widen out that picture just a little bit, was her constant companion, diamond mogul Maurice Templesman. He will be speaking a little bit later at the church, as will both John and Caroline. This will be a very private ceremony. Obviously, as you can see, it's a little behind schedule already. It was scheduled to begin, the Mass was at 10 o'clock. But it will be a very simple service, a very private service. There will be no congressional delegation. There will, in fact, be 4 senators in attendance: Claiborne Pell of Rhode Island, Daniel Patrick Moynihan of New York, John Kerry of Massachusetts, and Don Glenn of Ohio will all be there. But there will be no official congressional delegation. You're looking at a picture of Arlington National Cemetery, where later today she will be laid to rest, and the gravesite will not be open to visitation today, but will be open, I'm told, Wednesday.
When she picked the site, Bryant, for her husband's burial, she said the place is so beautiful she could stay there forever.
Senator, we see so many of the people lining the streets there. This is a woman who was born to wealth and grace, and yet the common people of New York and across this country seem to have had great affinity for her. How do you explain that?
Because there's no class left in this society, and she represents class. We elevate people, as Andy Warhol said, to 15 minutes of celebrityhood. There's a plethora of celebrity. This woman stands out because she was classy, dignified, and an embodiment of everything we had hoped would turn out in this society, which hasn't. But people are saying goodbye to a lot today, I think.
Let's take a brief look at the map here. This is obviously just a very rough map of New York City, and you can see the Onassis apartment there at 85th and 5th. It just has to go 1 block east to 2 blocks east, excuse me, to get over to Park Avenue, and the church is there right on 84th and Park. It should be arriving there any moment. Mr. Ambrose, weigh in on that for me, if you will, about how a woman of such class and dignity, so many who were just common folk, could love her so much, when generally that kind of a background would engender some kind of resentment.
Yes, very much so. But she got us through the worst moment. Everybody over 10 years old in 1963 remembers her with the greatest gratitude, because it was her strength that carried us through that awful, awful November of 1963. Those images are indelible. Sandy's talked about some of them, the blood on her pink dress, but her bearing and her conduct, and Kitty just talked about she didn't take any drugs and no sleeping pills, and she planned, but she got us through. It was her strength that carried the whole nation through that funeral. You look at pictures of John Kennedy now, and I know that everyone in this country over 10 years old is thinking of that fabulous scene when he is saluting the casket going by. Yeah. And that was her doing.
If I may interrupt for a second.
Please do, Steve.
That was also the first time anything like this had been ever seen on television.
That's right.
And I liken it to an electronic communion that weekend, which bound the nation together in its grief, because a lot of very talented people, with no instructions from their superiors, just filmed what they saw and wrote what they saw. But the shock of recognition the television imposed upon us was what brought us together that weekend, and she was the person who in effect presided over it.
It was amazing to me, to all of you, that she had the presence of mind. She did exhaustive research. She looked back at the Lincoln funeral. She planned everything just so, the riderless horse. It was Jackie Kennedy who was responsible for the eternal flame at the gravesite. She made sure the crepe on the White House was hung just so. I mean, she had the wherewithal to plan it so painstakingly. It truly is amazing.
Almost to orchestrate, and that has a kind of a harsh ring to it, but it's what the nation needed so badly. We just desperately had to have that funeral done right. And she's the one who did it.
I don't think, you're right, it shouldn't be used orchestrated in a pejorative sense. She wanted her husband to leave the view of millions with great dignity for what he had brought to the presidency and to our lives.
And it was a big moment for television. The Truman funeral, that Truman had died in the late 50s, was not covered by live television. So this was the first presidential funeral to be covered by live television.
Let me interject here for just a moment and identify the pallbearers as they make their way to the casket. They are Jack Walsh, who served as a Secret Service agent during, worked with JFK during his White House years. Anthony Radswell, who is, of course, her nephew. Timmy Shriver, the brother of Maria Shriver Schwarzenegger, also a nephew. William Kennedy Smith, son of Gene Kennedy Smith and the late Stephen Smith. Bobby Kennedy, who is the son of Robert and Ethel Kennedy. Chris Lawford, who's the son of Peter and Pat Lawford. Teddy Kennedy Jr. and Louis Rutherford. Those are the 8 pallbearers who now bear the casket as it makes its way into St. Ignatius Loyola. As you can see, it is absolutely a gorgeous day in New York City. Sun shining brightly, temperature in the low 80s, high 70s today.
Cameras are not being permitted inside the church, but we will be getting an audio feed of the service.
And it should be noted, this will be a funeral mass. It will be a Roman Catholic mass, a complete service. And so some of those who will be taking part will be doing strictly the offertory prayers and the readings that are a part of every extraordinary mass. There will be a couple of poems rendered, one of them by Maurice Templesman, whom we noted earlier, one of them by Carolyn Kennedy Schlossberg, and the eulogy to be delivered by Senator Edward Kennedy. You talk of memories, I think we all recall Senator Kennedy's speech following the death of his brother Bobby in '68, and how moving that was in St. Patrick's Cathedral, just a mere, 35 blocks from where he's waiting right now.
Mountain, he will destroy the veil that veils all peoples. The web that is woven over all nations, he will destroy death forever. The Lord God will wipe away the tears from all faces. The reproach of his people he will remove from the whole earth. For the Lord has spoken. On that day it will be said, behold our God to whom we look to save us. This is the Lord for whom we looked. Let us rejoice.
As we watch and await the appearance of the casket, we note that Stephen Ambrose, presidential historian, is joining us here in New York, and Senator Van Oker, White House correspondent during the Kennedy years, is joining us from Washington. Gentlemen, don't feel compelled, but feel free to jump in any time if you have some comments what struck you about the service.
Kitty was talking about Hillary Rodham Clinton and Jacqueline Kennedy. Looking in the other direction, Jacqueline Kennedy was had very warm feelings and spoke to them about Bess Truman, who you would think at first blush would be the woman that she had the least in common with, who lived in that house. And yet she was very flattering about Bess and almost held her up as a model.
You see the pallbearers flanking the steps right now. Several of Mrs. Onassis' nephews are serving as pallbearers.
One of those who attended the wake at her apartment commented on the simplicity of the event. The casket, a simple one with a beautiful antique cloth over it.
Am I on?
Please, go ahead.
If I may say so, I'm struck by the networks giving up all of this time to cover this event, and just a couple weeks ago, we went through it with the Nixon funeral and how tremendously important this is to the American people to be able to share in these moments. And the magic of television has brought it to us. I guess that's the historian in me speaking. We didn't have this kind of coverage when I was a kid, or even in the 50s, and even into the 60s we didn't.
Well, as Senator Van Oker said earlier, it really is a national communion of sorts and a cathartic experience for many people.
Yeah.